Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show with your host, Phil Tarrant.
Good everyone, thanks for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on board as we discuss property. Today we're going to get into how to sell your property, and often on the Smart Property Investment Show our main focus is about the acquisition of property as property investors. So how we go about creating wealth through property, and typically it's about buying property and building a portfolio from which hopefully you can retire on, and we go into that at length. But we don't often talk about selling property, and by and large property investors in our audience and our listeners, you guys typically like to buy and hold strategy and then either pay down debt at some point in time or sell at the end and cash out and live a nice comfortable retirement. But I thought it'd be a wise idea for us to have a look at selling property, particularly in the market that we are in and heading into, where things are changing. It's softening quite a lot in terms of price points, particularly in Sydney and in Melbourne. And that's really a product of market cycles. So buying property in hot markets and buying property in cold markets or frosty markets require different sets of skills. So today I've asked Kiki Bermudez into the studio from Mint 360 Property in Randwick. How you going, Kiki? Did I get that right? Bermudez?
Kiki Bermudez.
Kiki Bermudez.
It's like the Bermuda Triangle. That's the best reference point.
Bermuda Triangle of
but
Property.
Just mix it up at the end.
So where is the Bermuda Triangle of Property? Is that Randwick sort of Coogee?
Randwick, Coogee, Clovelly.
Where you never know what's going to happen and stuff just disappears for a hot price, right?
You never know in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, that's for sure.
That's cool. So I know everyone's going to be going, oh, this person's not from around here. So before we come in, where did you say you're from? Idaho?
I'm from Iowa.
Iowa, okay.
Similar, sounds the same.
Same but different?
Yeah, so I've been here for 13 years, selling real estate for over 10.
Okay.
And I've got a good team behind me, a couple sales associate, EA, just a really good structure to make sure that we get good results for our clients.
That's cool. And I want to get into tapping into your skills around selling property, and obviously per my sort of intro, we're moving into, or we are in a market moving into a market where it's going to be a bit tougher, I think, to sell property. But before we get there, 10 years you've been doing this, 13 years in Australia. How'd you end up here? What's the backstory?
Well, I did a university degree, psychology and communications in Iowa.
Okay.
And I wanted to travel the world before I actually got stuck in the rat race somewhere.
Okay.
But with all intentions to go into real estate, because those are two beneficial things. So I came traveling to Australia and then met a man, and then the rest is history. Got my license here and then have been practicing that since I arrived.
Okay. And how long have you been at Mint 360? Is that your business, is it?
No, so I'm one of the sales executives there, but I've exclusively been at that company for 10 years, so quite loyal and really enjoy the environment.
How did you start sort of on the front desk doing rental agreements and stuff?
Oh no, I went in as a sales associate / assistant just to get my feet wet, make sure I knew what I was doing before I took people's $1 million assets to sell. So now I had that confidence. Now I'm a commission-only agent and built my own team and a good brand in the area.
So you're a much better agent today than what you were 10 years ago. What do you think the biggest difference is?
Experience.
Okay.
Experience, and also just going through changing markets. So I started in 2008 with the GFC. So I remember it would take months to sell a property. And then in the last 4 years, we've seen a huge bull run. And now that market's starting to shift again. So it's almost bringing up these feelings of that previous time many years ago. And
we'll get into, obviously, experience pieces is pretty important when you choose an agent. But so you've been at Mint 360 for the whole 10 years in the same office, still in the same...
Well, they've moved offices because it's they've grown in terms of people in the business. But yeah, same company.
Yeah.
Okay. Long time.
And you know the Randwick area pretty well. So for our listeners that aren't familiar with it, Randwick is sort of southish Sydney. It's sort of in between the airport and the beach. Yeah. Bondi, pretty much. So imagine you look after Randwick, probably going to Coogee area. Is that all your domain, is it?
That's right. Clovelly, Kingsford, Kensington, Maroubra. Okay.
So you got it's a mixture of markets there from Maroubra versus the Clovelly. They're both on the beach, but very different real estate markets.
Yes.
And again, it goes down to you need the right agent on your side if you're selling in a particular area. But how over 10 years have you seen that market change, sort of that Randwick, Clovelly, Maroubra? I know Maroubra is worth a lot more than what it was in terms of real estate from 10 years ago. But
Definitely. Maroubra Beach is the place to be now. I actually live there. Okay. And there's a lot of competition to get into that sector. But I'd say the infrastructure has improved more. So, for example, the incoming light rail, which is due for completion next year, we've had a lot of investors very focused on capitalizing on that once that's completed, just for ease of access straight into the CBD. The Coogee Pavilion, which is right on the coastline, Maryville product has just kind of made it more Bondi-esque, so to speak. So as that infrastructure improves, more people are into that area.
That's good. So how many people, have they rezoned as a result of the light rail? Do you know? Has there been a whole bunch of rezoning through there on that?
They've done some rezoning down Anzac Parade and also in close proximity to UNSW, the university there. And the Prince of Wales Hospital, they've had a big acquisition of a big chunk of homes where a lot of people are now stressed to actually buy houses by, say, mid to end of May because they're being forced out. So that's going to expand that hospital footprint, but also increase that demand at the moment for houses in particular.
And as I mentioned before, I want to chat today about how you go about selling a property, and for investors about getting the biggest price you can for your property. That's what everyone wants as a seller. But within the market that you work with in Randwick, do you get a lot of investor activity, or is it mainly owner-occupied stuff out there?
You get a lot of investor activity. I would say that's eased in more recent times, just simply due to the fact that lending has become a bit tighter. So Randwick, we get these reports from domainandrealestate.com that show who actually buys in Randwick, and it's proportionally about 75% of people who live in Randwick want to stay in Randwick and buy in Randwick. So a lot of owner occupiers are in there, and a big chunk of investors are also in there as well too. Okay,
that's cool. And the investors within that belt, so that's sort of South Sydney, do you guys touch like Alexandria and go that far? Which I'll chat to you about that, but what sort of properties do investors normally chase in that belt around Randwick?
Yeah, so Randwick, it's very interesting. People are very, very focused on small blocks. So small blocks tend to have the best capital growth and appreciation. So you'll find that buyers agents, when they're assisting investors to purchase, will focus on that type of property versus big blocks. So in Alexandria, Waterloo, you tend to see bigger complexes, and that tends to be more of the norm of what's available. But whenever I sell real estate in Randwick and it tends to be in a bigger block, it actually is much harder to sell. Because it's less desired and you have more of it that's similar. So when the market tends to weaken or soften and we're going to sell something in a big block, the whole team is like, okay, here we go. We know it's going to be tough. So I would definitely recommend smaller blocks in that area.
And the tenants coming in, a lot of students, I imagine, and young professionals. Is that pretty much the target market?
Yeah, it's quite a variety. I would say Coogee tends to be a bit more transient, just with travelers and so forth. But a lot of young professionals, you get a lot of doctors, nurses, UNSW staff that want to be close to that area for convenience.
Okay.
Yeah.
And everyone talks about sort of oversupply of units in a city of Sydney now, and same down in Melbourne. When I look at the Sydney market, you've got sort of Alexandria belt, which has just gone absolutely ballistic over the last sort of decade or so. Are most of those properties down there rented, or there's a lot of empty stuff out there? And for our listeners, this is along the Eastern Distributor. So if you're coming from the airport to Sydney, on the left-hand side there, Green Park, Alexandria, what's the other suburbs around there?
We've got Waterloo,
all that sort of stuff. So it's just exploded, which is impossible to get in there if you want to drive. But is it all rented, or is it pretty empty? Do you know?
No, I think it's pretty occupied just due to the fact that it's in close proximity to the CBD. I think like Mascot, for example, has more of a supply, so that is a tougher area to sell in. And I think banks are more restricted. That's close to the airport in terms of your supply. So some supply and demand is pretty important. So Randwick, for example, to compare it to those suburbs, there's no more space really to build there. It's about developers who are buying up these houses to redevelop these small boutique blocks. So that supply is very much in control versus some of these other suburbs like Wallach Creek, Mascot, close to the airport, have a bit more supply and therefore choice. And then it dilutes that market and makes it tougher to sell when the time comes.
It's a booming market. Every time I go down there, the spate of development, and obviously there's a train line going through there and stuff, but it's pretty hard going. It's changed a lot. It's changed a lot from just being industrial to a little hotbed of real estate now, which is cool. But anyway, so let's have a chat, Kiki, about selling property. So how do you maximise your sales price as an investor? So investors choose to sell for a whole bunch of reasons. They might be selling down their portfolio to prepare for retirement, or they could be selling off an asset which they feel as though has done the work that it's need to have done. They've received a lot of growth and they're looking to sell out and use that money in other markets to try and get some upside benefits. So irrespective of why you're selling, let's just put that to one side, how do you go about selling property in a slowing market most effectively? So what are the key steps? Do you want to go through those? It's probably the best way to do it. So starting, some people choose to do it themselves, and a lot of for sale by owner stuff going on right now, where you can sell your own property, or you can choose to use a real estate agent. We're obviously very pro real estate agents, so they provide immense value if you get the right agent. So how do you work out who's the right agent for you, Kiki?
No, of course. I think it's interesting. In our market, we meet a lot of potential sellers they come through our open homes. And I think first impressions are everything in terms of how do I, as an agent, interact with buyers. It's about building trust very, very quickly. So just seeing how they are operationally. Now, if they can't obviously meet with you face to face, we'll send through proposals and information. But I think one of the critical factors in choosing an agent, they're going to talk to you about negotiations, but they're also going to talk to you about pricing for your property. And sometimes naturally sellers, they think their property is worth probably more than it is. That's just a natural inclination of humans. Now, with regards to backing up the price that we assess that for you, it's really just working through that data clearly versus me just plucking a figure from the air to get you excited to sell, if that makes sense. Sometimes agents will unfortunately overprice things to attract your business. But what I'm finding, even if what we're using this recent sales data from 3 months ago, that data is no longer valid as what it would have been in that booming market we were in. We're seeing probably things move back 5%, even as much as 10%. So even using that information clearly to support what we're telling you, you're going to have to be bearing that in mind, and that would be indications you're dealing with an honest agent versus one that's buying your business.
Are you saying there's dishonest agents out there?
I would say there's a few out there, like in any trade. I would love to. I would love not to.
So is the agent that gives you the cheapest commission the best agent?
I would love to say yes, but the answer is absolutely not. I would say your fees are going to vary out there. Really good agents in my area charge 2% in terms of giving you an idea of what to expect. And you can find agents as low as 1%.
Yeah.
Would I use them? No, absolutely not. I think it's going to be coming down to their systems behind the scenes in terms of how they service buyers. Now you find that buyers, you look at the likes of Uber, they want things instantly and they want it with great flair and service. So having that agent actually show you how they're going to service your buyers is going to build trust and then, of course, help you get that result. But it's important to talk about how you negotiate as well. So a lot of people will hand over their biggest asset with having no idea if you know how to get a good price or not. So what I'll do is I'll sit down with you as a potential client and I'll talk you through a negotiation. So we'll give you an example of something that I've recently sold and asking really, really simple questions. So when a buyer makes an offer to me, I'll ask them very simply, how did you arrive at that figure? So I'm really trying to assess who they are, how they operate, what's important to them and how they need to be communicated with. A very, very simple question after that is that your maximum level of interest for this property? And you would be amazed at what comes out of people's mouths. They say no all of the time, where it's actually my best opportunity to get an increase in offer at that point in time.
Okay, so don't choose the agent who offers you the cheapest commission rate. So if I've got 3 agents sitting in front of me and I've got to choose agent A, agent B or agent C, someone tells me they're going to get the biggest price, someone tells me they're going to give me the cheapest commission cut, and the other person tells me that it's a cooling market, it's going to be tough to sell this. My recommendation is to look at how we present, position, market it. Which of those 3 do I choose?
Okay, good question. I think it's going to be the agent that gives you the honest truth, who's going to give you the support and show you their tools in terms of how they're going to get you there, and also do reference checks as well. We haven't talked about that. So talking to their last sellers to see if they're telling the truth.
And a good agent will be happy for you to say, yeah, here's some phone numbers, give them a call.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Call them.
Yeah.
I think that's great. It's when you're hiring someone, you definitely do that for any job interview. So I would definitely recommend that.
So we're talking about choosing an agent. How do you know you've chosen the wrong agent? What are the key things to go, oh, hang on a second, this isn't working?
You're chasing them for information
constantly
versus them providing that to you consistently. Perhaps they're confusing what messages they're giving you. So they're saying one thing and doing another. Those are pretty key things. And it's just following through with what you say. So and also, unfortunately, there's auctions that are very much the norm in our area, how we sell real estate. They'll quote something to the public that the client's not necessarily in line with or across. So at the beginning of every sales process, we'll have a meeting with the client to set up the rules of the game so they're comfortable and familiar. So they should have that meeting with you up front so you're on the same page from the beginning.
Okay, so if you're sitting there and you have seen some of the marketing going out, you don't like it, or your property's been on the market for 4 weeks and you haven't had a lot of interest in terms of open homes, something's wrong?
Probably, yes.
Yeah. So what do you do then? Do you swap agents, or do you get a big stick out and beat the agent you've got and say you're not doing a very good job?
Well, I think that agent would ideally sit down with you and reset and talk about a new strategy, because it's all about, if the property's not getting the traction it needs to sell, there's a couple key things. It's either it's not being marketed well, and presentation is behind that. So if the furniture isn't right, if it's not very pretty to the public, you're going to be less attractive. And secondly, price. In a price-sensitive market, it's very important that the agent gives you that information quickly, so you make those price adjustments quickly, so you can respond with how the market needs to, I guess, to make sure they come through and have a look.
And when you look at the cycle for selling a property, how do you go about planning from the outset? So I guess the planning starts at the choosing an agent side of things, but once you've chosen an agent, who should take the lead on, here's how we're going to go about selling this thing? That's the agent's responsibility?
Yeah, a good agent will, like, my EA's sole role is to make sure that she sets up everything admin, but that starts with styling advice. So if it's an empty property or an owner-occupied property, we make sure that we go through and we literally, in fine detail, give you a list of exactly what needs to be done. We will coordinate all the tradespeople to make that happen. So it's very much about advice around decluttering the property, painting cracks, changing appliances. So you could invest several $1,000s. I'm selling something in Randwick for an investor in Perth at the moment. He spent around $10K, reluctantly so, but our first inspection produced 14 groups, which is awesome in this market, and we've got 5 contracts out from that first inspection.
Okay.
So it's really about just making it beautiful and visually pleasing. So even if your second bedroom might be a gym, I would highly recommend making sure you change that space to utilize it how buyers would probably normally utilize it, so they can get excited about the possibilities and what that actual space can offer them.
And how much of the planning of selling a property relates to who your target market is to sell it? So in Randwick, who's buying property in Randwick? Families, investors? Is there any particular ethnic group who is buying property in Randwick or the Randwick area? And we use that as an example that you need to be styling or positioning your property towards. How do you go about working that out?
I would say it depends on the actual property itself. So if it's a semi-detached home or freestanding home, it tends to be professionals working in the CBD or mums with children. And it's mostly Australian in that Coogee Randwick market, people, I would say, on a whole. And in terms of your lower end market, which is your 1 and your 2 bedrooms, you tend to have a lot more investors in that market. They tend to be, I would say, again, mostly Australian in the Randwick Coogee market. Where it tends to shift a bit more is, say, Kensington, Kingsford, which is right next door. But then you've got a lot of international focus, particularly from the Asian market for UNSW for their children. So you have a lot, like, out of 10 buyers, you might have 6 or 7 Chinese, Indonesian buyers, versus if that same property was in Randwick 2 blocks away, it'd probably be 1 or 2.
Yeah. So you need to be that specific. You need to understand who is most likely to buy this property and make sure it's presented in a way which best suits, those potential buyers, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And how do you go about in terms of styling properties? What's your recommendation on if you're selling an investment property, and we'll stick with Randwick, I imagine, what's the average price for a 2-bedroom unit in Randwick? It's probably about $800,000 or something like that.
More than that now.
More than that now, is it?
Yeah, I would say you could pick up a very small one, say 65 square meters with parking, maybe $850 to $9 kind of thing. And then your more premium ones in the smaller blocks in good nick, kind of that 9 to 1 range.
Okay. And investors are buying this stuff, right? Like a lot of internationals as well.
They chase capital growth.
Yeah. So how much do you spend? Like, number 1, do you worry about styling a property? Number 2, you mentioned someone investor from Perth sold something and he spent $10,000 on fixing it up. How do you work out how much to spend on the property to actually get the biggest bang for its buck in terms of a sale price?
I think it's doing the basics without overcapitalizing. So for example, that investor from Perth, it was a completely original unit. so tired in the kitchen and bathroom, but instead of ripping out the bathroom completely and doing, a $15,000 bathroom, we resprayed the tiles, re-enameled the bathtub in the shower as well, and that cost us $2,500. And then with all the other bits, we probably redid that bathroom for about $4.5. So it's really about just making sure that both investors and owner occupiers can actually live in it straight away versus going, oh my gosh, we have to rip this out and spend not even $15,000. They'd probably think in their heads 20, 25. So you really just have to take away those objections, but we would guide you on what's appropriate and what's too much, so you're not wasting your money.
And when you think about marketing, so, talking about styling a property so it's the most attractive and the best presented property to get the biggest price, you actually got to get people to an open home to check out a place beforehand. So you need to market a property effectively. What are you finding is the best ways, means, tactics to market property in 2018?
Yeah, of course. We actually measure that. So when buyers come to our open homes, we take notice of what's working and what's not. So when you come through, we say, where did you see the property advertised? So believe it or not, a signboard, but now solar signboards are very in. That's awesome, especially if you're on a busier street, because you get a really good return on that investment for, say, $500, whatever it might be. I am a big believer of video in terms of, like, I'm selling this, early $2 million house at the moment. And I've had quite a few people go, do they have a video? Do they have a video? So they want to get internal understanding of the space without, actually seeing that. So Facebook Live, I'm doing tours on Facebook Live now. So it gives people a preview and understanding of the space, which is a short video. So the consumers are responding to that in a really good way. So I think those simple things are great. Some real estate companies offer premium placement online. So in this area, it's realestateindomain.com.au. So you have to pay to be at the top. If the company doesn't subscribe to premium placement, your listing will start on page 5. So if you're a 2-bedroom unit in Randwick and there are 40 2-bedroom units in Randwick, it's pretty important you start at the top to make sure people notice you and that your photos look amazing.
What's your view on print marketing these days?
It depends on what the product is. In our area, the major publication is the Southern Courier, and that is still somewhat effective, but more so for houses as opposed to units. The only time we look at units is if it's a ground floor unit, and the older generation might look at it, because believe it or not, a lot of the older generation still just uses that and they don't use the internet. So I think eventually it will evolve out of fashion. But some of these more premium houses are going the publication in Domain. They've got a beautiful coffee table book where you can spend thousands, but you do get noticed by gentlemen that work in the financial markets, and they talk about that over their breaks. So it really depends on the property type.
And there's a thing called vendor paid advertising, vendor paid marketing. So as a real estate agent, you would say your fee for us to sell this property is X%, and you would be the advocate for the vendor during that whole process to sell their property. But often you're going to have to spend more money in terms of the marketing. How do you approach that with a potential seller of a property? Do you say it's 2% and you're going to have to spend another X tens of thousands on marketing? How's that go down?
That's the norm in our area. So people aren't resistant to that necessarily. It's about how much do they actually have to spend. So everything that we put together in terms of a package, we actually charge it at cost to the client. A lot of people have this perception that we mark it up to make money out of it. We make nothing. We're actually constantly negotiating and sometimes changing providers if we can get better packages for our clients. So that is, I guess, we offer the different levels of packages. It's just a matter of I guess what kind of investment they want to make. So I would say on average, for example, in the Randwick market, if you were going online, you'd be looking at a price point of probably close to $6,000 in terms of your expenditure on that. If you were a house and you were going to opt to use print media and everything, you'd be probably closer to 10 to 11K. Okay. And it really just depends, the world is your oyster in terms of how far do you want to go. But I do believe in a challenging market, which we are slowly evolving towards and already in it at the moment, in reality, that ensuring that you present it well and that you do invest that money. So it might be painful at the time, whether it's a few $100, a couple $1,000s more than what you think is practical. But in the big picture, it is such a small percentage of actually what your property's value is. And that one extra buyer that you can introduce could make a huge difference to price.
So we're moving from a seller's market into a buyer's market. So a seller's market is when you sell your property really quickly for heaps of money because everyone's buying, and you move into a market where it's a buyer's market where there's less pressure on property and therefore your chance of getting a deal is more effective, right? So are you starting to see that now in the market you work within? Is it moving from a seller's to a buyer's market?
I wouldn't say it's a true buyer's market just yet. There's definitely a shift. It's not all in control of the buyers. It depends on the product. So I think that average real estate or not so great real estate is so much harder to sell now versus before it was flying off the shelves. People were fighting over it and I was confused. Now, good real estate is still selling well, provided it has parking. It's in a small boutique block. So we've got really good buyers out there. It's just much more price sensitive. So it's all relative, but I mean, I definitely think that there's more, not more power on the buyer's end, but there's definitely, they have a bit more leverage than they did before.
So now rather than putting a hat of a seller in, if we put the hat in a buyer, and property investors, we like buying property, how do you know when the market shifts in your favour? What are the indicators to go, oh, hang on a second, things are starting to move now, real estate agents are getting back to me really quickly. What do you look for?
I would just say, when you're at an inspection, how many buyers are actually at the inspection, right? So you can tell, people can tell when a property is popular or it's not popular. So that's a pretty good indication. I mean, it's hard for me with, the follow-up. I follow up diligently. I have for years. So now that others are, it's harder for me to relate to that statement, so to speak. But I think what I'm noticing a lot is a lot of agents are price reductions. So we keep on top of every single listing in our market. And so you'll see other agents, they'll start it at a certain price point, and then they'll email you, say 5 times during the course of that campaign going price reduction, price change. And then you can really see that they haven't really probably gained the momentum they need to get a top price or what they were actually expecting for the property. So that's a good sign, I would say.
As a real estate buyer, you like to see a bit of blood on the street, right? You look at the reasons why people are selling, and if you can track that down and find that out, it puts you in very good favour. Do real estate agents like selling property in a softening market, or you hate it when it's like that because it's a lot harder to shift property?
I don't mind it, but I definitely have less sleep at the moment.
Okay.
I think the biggest challenge for agents is managing vendors' expectations. Because like I said, even this data 3 months old, whilst it's very, very recent and relevant and what the banks would be using, that's even 5 to 10% off now. So sellers just can't wrap their head around the fact that we're saying, actually, the market is giving us offers at this range. And it's almost as if we're the bad person versus, well, that's the reality of the market. So I would say managing vendors would be the biggest challenge, hands down.
And as a buyer of real estate, how do you endear yourself better with a real estate agent so they like you more than everyone else, and therefore you're the guy that they want to negotiate with? What makes you a good seller? What makes you a good buyer?
Good buyer, I think, be respectful and be nice and be responsive.
Yeah.
So like buyers, I get it. People want things when they want it, but we follow up several times. And if you ignore me over and over again, even though I might have given you a contract, you're not necessarily going to be, in my eyes, my top buyer, so to speak. So basically, if we're following up, even if you don't have time to talk, just send a quick text. Still interested? Let's stay in touch. So then we know where you're at, in the sense that you'll be kept respectfully in the loop. And when the time comes, whether it's an offer before or at auction, you'll know what's going on.
So it actually matters to be liked by a real estate agent.
100%.
Yeah, because a lot of people churn and burn, and
people can be really rude to us, and it
doesn't help, right?
Oh God, no, not at all. No, because you meet a lot of nice people out there, and definitely it's like anybody, you want to help people who are nice and respectful to you.
That's cool. So before we wind up, Kiki, I want the one secret that you've never told anyone around how to sell property most effectively. What's the one thing that's your secret to maximising your sales price?
I always say the clients that actually trust me or trust my process, because it's always it's the process, it's not the promise of a price that will get you the best result. I always get them better results. Always. Those that fight me and go, oh no, you can't do that. Why are you doing that? And question and challenge everything. They usually shoot themselves in the foot.
Okay.
Honestly, that's what it is. If you just let go, it's like going to a doctor and you let him operate, right? Versus going, oh, maybe you should cut over that way. You don't do that. It's the exact same thing.
So what you're saying is that if you've gone through the process of choosing the right agent, just let them do their job.
100%.
Okay, I'll close with that. Kiki, enjoy the chat. Thanks for your insights, and let us know how you're getting on. I know it's a busy market where you are, and we are in a bit of a state of flux. And for people looking to buy in that Randwick, Coogee, Alexandria area, I think you're going to start seeing some bargains. But speak to your real estate agents, because if they know you and like you, they'll give you the best properties, I imagine. So anyway, no, thanks for coming. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Remember to check out smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. If you're not subscribing yet to our daily morning market intelligence, so you're the first to know what's going on in property, smartpropertyinvestment.com.au/subscribe. And if you like getting your info from social media, find us, like us, follow us. It's Smart Property HQ. Any questions at all, even for Kiki, about what we've been chatting about today, or how you can choose the right agent, email the team, editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. We'll be back again soon. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.